What they discovered there will shock you. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth as twilight settled over the forest. Shadows stretched long and foreboding, creeping like whispers through the underbrush. The occasional rustle of leaves and distant call of an owl were the only sounds, adding an eerie melody to the night. Sarah Cooper gripped her daughter's hand tightly, her flashlight cutting through the encroaching darkness. Her husband, Jack, walked a few steps ahead, his eyes scanning the ground as though searching for something. "We shouldn't have come this far," Sarah murmured, her voice trembling slightly. She glanced down at Emma, their 8-year-old daughter, whose wide eyes darted nervously around. Jack turned, his face illuminated briefly by the beam of Sarah's flashlight. His jaw was set, his expression one of determination mixed with a hint of regret. "I know," he admitted, his voice low but firm. "But the map, it has to lead somewhere. We didn't come all this way to turn back now." The map he referred to was a curiosity, a crumpled piece of parchment Emma had found folded inside an old, leather-bound book in the attic. The book had belonged to Jack's grandfather, a man whose stories of hidden treasures and mysterious adventures had always been dismissed as fanciful tales. But something about the map's intricacy, its strange symbols, and the cryptic note scribbled at the bottom, "*When the shadows grow long, follow the guide who hops ahead," had piqued Jack's curiosity. What had started as a whimsical family outing had turned into an increasingly unsettling journey. The trail, initially clear, had narrowed into a winding path flanked by dense thickets, the kind that seemed alive, closing in behind them as they ventured further. Emma tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling, "what if Grandpa's stories were just stories? What if there's nothing here?" Sarah knelt, brushing a strand of Emma's dark hair from her face. "Then we'll turn around and go home," she said gently, though her voice lacked conviction. She shot a glance at Jack, who had stopped and was studying the map again. "Jack," she called, her tone firmer now, "we need to think about Emma. It's getting late." Before Jack could respond, a sudden movement to their left made all three of them freeze. The flashlight beam swung toward the sound, illuminating a patch of tall grass. There, perched atop a mossy rock, was a rabbit. At first glance, it looked like any other rabbit, small, with soft, gray fur and twitching whiskers. But its eyes were strangely piercing, almost intelligent. The rabbit didn't flinch under the light. Instead, it tilted its head as if studying them. "Dad," Emma whispered, clutching her mother's hand tighter, "why is it staring at us?" Jack took a cautious step forward, the map clutched in one hand. The rabbit didn't move. It seemed to be waiting. Then, without warning, it hopped off the rock and darted into the underbrush. "Wait!" Jack called out, surprising both Sarah and Emma. "Wait!" Sarah hissed, incredulous. "You're not seriously thinking about following a rabbit into the woods, are you?" "Think about it," Jack said, his voice rising with a mix of excitement and desperation. "The note on the map, it said to follow the guide. What if this is it? What if the rabbit is the guide?" Sarah stared at him, torn between disbelief and the nagging feeling that he might be right. Before she could protest further, Emma spoke up. "I think we should follow it." Both parents turned to look at her. Emma's voice was quiet but resolute. "Grandpa always said his stories were for people who believed in magic." "I believe." Jack nodded, his decision made. He turned and started after the rabbit, his flashlight bobbing with each step. Sarah hesitated, her grip on Emma's hand tightening. "Mom," Emma said softly, "what if it's trying to help us?" Sarah sighed, the weight of her daughter's innocent faith tipping the scale. "Fine," she relented. "But stay close to me. No wandering off." The three of them plunged deeper into the forest, following the faint rustle of the rabbit's movements. The path became rougher, the air colder. The once muted sounds of the forest seemed amplified now, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the snap of a twig, the distant howl of the wind. They soon reached a clearing bathed in moonlight. In the center stood the rabbit, its gray fur glowing almost silver. It sat perfectly still, as if waiting for them to catch up. "What now?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. As if in response, the rabbit hopped toward a cluster of boulders at the edge of the clearing. It paused, then disappeared into a narrow crevice between the rocks. "No," Sarah said immediately, shaking her head. "Absolutely not. There's no way we're squeezing through there." Jack, however, was already moving toward the crevice, inspecting it with his flashlight. "It's bigger than it looks," he said. "I think we can fit." Emma stepped forward, her face lit with a mixture of fear and excitement. "I'll go first," she offered. "Absolutely not," Sarah and Jack said in unison. "I'll go," Jack decided. He handed Sarah the flashlight and took a deep breath before crouching and slipping into the crevice. His voice echoed faintly from the other side. "It opens up into a tunnel. Come on." Sarah hesitated, her instinct screaming at her to turn back. But the look in Emma's eyes, the same look of wonder and belief that she'd seen so many times before, pushed her forward. The cold stone scraped against her hands as she squeezed through the narrow passage, Emma close behind. When they emerged on the other side, they found Jack standing at the entrance of a dimly lit tunnel. And there, just a few feet ahead, was the rabbit, waiting patiently. The family didn't realize it yet, but they were about to uncover a secret that would change their lives forever. The air inside the tunnel was damp and cool, carrying the faint metallic tang of minerals. Sarah's footsteps echoed faintly against the uneven stone floor as she tightened her grip on Emma's hand. The beam of her flashlight danced along the walls, revealing streaks of green moss and jagged cracks where the earth had shifted over time. Jack moved ahead, his determination palpable, his eyes fixed on the rabbit that continued its steady pace, just out of reach. "This is madness," Sarah muttered under her breath, though a part of her couldn't deny the pull of curiosity. Emma, ever the dreamer, was less hesitant. "Do you think the rabbit is magic?" she asked softly, her voice filled with wonder. Jack chuckled, his tone a mix of amusement and nerves. "If it's not, it's the smartest rabbit I've ever seen." The tunnel began to slope downward, the air growing cooler with each step. Their flashlights cast long shadows that danced and flickered, making the narrow walls feel alive. The silence was broken only by their breaths and the soft patter of the rabbit's feet ahead. Then came the sound, low and distant, like the rumble of thunder, though it seemed to come from deep within the earth. Jack stopped abruptly, causing Sarah and Emma to nearly collide with him. "What was that?" Sarah asked, her voice tight. Jack held up a hand, signaling for silence. They stood still, straining to listen. The rumble came again, this time louder, accompanied by a faint vibration underfoot. "Is it an earthquake?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. "I don't think so," Jack replied, though his certainty was fading. The rabbit paused, its ears twitching, before it hopped forward with renewed urgency. Jack followed, and despite her better judgment, Sarah did too, her maternal instinct urging her to keep Emma close. The tunnel widened into a cavern, and the sight stopped them all in their tracks. Massive stalactites hung from the ceiling, shimmering with moisture. A subterranean stream cut through the center of the cavern, its surface reflecting the glow of bioluminescent fungi clinging to the walls. The rabbit sat at the edge of the stream, its head tilted as if waiting for them to catch up. "Jack," Sarah said cautiously, "this doesn't feel right. We should turn back." But before Jack could respond, the ground beneath them trembled violently. A deafening crack echoed through the cavern as a section of the ceiling collapsed, sending chunks of rock plummeting to the ground. "Run!" Jack shouted, grabbing Sarah's arm and pulling her toward the stream. Emma let out a frightened cry as the cavern filled with dust and the sound of falling stone. The rabbit darted across the stream, vanishing into another tunnel on the far side. "We have to follow it," Jack yelled, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Sarah hesitated, her instinct screaming to protect Emma, but the collapsing ceiling left her no choice. Jack led the way, splashing through the shallow stream as they raced after the rabbit. The cold water soaked their shoes, but none of them dared stop. They emerged into another tunnel just as the cavern behind them caved in completely, sealing off their path. Sarah doubled over, gasping for breath, while Emma clung to her, tears streaming down her face. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, cupping Emma's face in her hands. Emma nodded shakily, her small body trembling. Jack leaned against the wall, his own breathing ragged. "That was close," he said, his voice laced with a mix of relief and disbelief. Sarah glared at him, her fear boiling over into anger. "Close? Jack, we could have been killed. What were you thinking bringing us down here?" Before he could answer, a soft thump drew their attention. The rabbit was sitting a few feet away, its gray fur barely visible in the dim light. It tilted its head, its eyes locking onto Sarah's. "What is with this rabbit?" she muttered, but this time, there was no denying its uncanny behavior. The rumble came again, deeper and more menacing this time. The ground vibrated beneath their feet, and Sarah instinctively pulled Emma closer. "What's causing that?" Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Jack admitted, his earlier confidence now replaced by unease. The rabbit hopped forward, its movements quick and deliberate. Jack exchanged a glance with Sarah, then started after it. "You can't be serious," Sarah said, her voice rising in panic. "What choice do we have?" Jack shot back. "We can't go back, and staying here isn't safe either." Reluctantly, Sarah followed, keeping Emma close. The tunnel narrowed again, forcing them to walk single file. The wall seemed to press in on them, and the air grew colder with each step. The rabbit led them to another cavern, this one smaller, but no less breathtaking. At the center stood a stone pedestal, illuminated by the soft glow of the fungi. The rabbit hopped onto the pedestal and sat still, as if guarding whatever lay there. "What is this place?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack approached cautiously, his flashlight beam falling on a small, ornate box resting on the pedestal. Its surface was etched with intricate patterns, and a strange symbol, one that matched the markings on the map, was carved into its lid. "It's the same symbol," Jack said, his voice filled with awe. Emma stepped closer, her fear momentarily forgotten. "Do you think it's a treasure?" "Only one way to find out," Jack replied, reaching for the box. "Jack, wait!" Sarah warned, but it was too late. The moment Jack touched the box, the rumble returned, louder and more violent than before. The pedestal began to sink into the ground, and a series of stone mechanisms roared to life, their grinding echoing through the cavern. The rabbit leaped off the pedestal and darted toward another tunnel. "Follow it!" Jack shouted, clutching the box as he ran. Sarah and Emma followed, their hearts pounding as the ground shook beneath them. The tunnel twisted and turned, the walls alive with the sound of ancient machinery groaning into motion. The rabbit led them to an opening, and as they burst into the cool night air, the rumbling stopped. They collapsed onto the grass, gasping for breath, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. "What was that?" Sarah demanded, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and fury. Jack didn't answer. He was staring at the box in his hands, its intricate patterns now glowing faintly in the moonlight. The rabbit sat a few feet away, watching them with its piercing eyes. It wasn't over yet. The cool night air was a stark contrast to the stifling tension that gripped the family. Jack sat cross-legged on the damp grass, the ornate box resting in his lap. His flashlight illuminated the carvings that seemed to shimmer faintly in the dark. Sarah paced nearby, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, while Emma crouched beside the rabbit, her wide eyes locked on its every movement. This is insane," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "We just narrowly escaped being buried alive, and you're treating that thing like it's some kind of prize." Jack didn't respond immediately. His fingers traced the intricate patterns on the box as if searching for a hidden mechanism. "There's more to this than we understand," he said finally, his voice low and thoughtful. "The map led us here, the rabbit led us here. And this," he lifted the box slightly. "This means something." "Or it's a trap," Sarah snapped. "What if opening that thing triggers something worse?" Emma, still sitting beside the rabbit, looked up. "Mom," she said softly, "the rabbit saved us." Sarah turned, her frustration momentarily overshadowed by confusion. "What are you talking about?" "It didn't have to help us," Emma continued, stroking the rabbit's soft fur. "It could have run off when the cave started collapsing, but it didn't. It waited for us. It showed us the way out." Sarah's gaze shifted to the rabbit, which sat calmly beside Emma, its small frame oddly steady and composed. Its eyes met Sarah's, and for a moment, she felt a strange sense of understanding, as if the creature were silently reassuring her. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, though her voice lacked conviction. Jack stood, cradling the box. "We can't ignore this," he said. "We need to figure out what's inside." Before Sarah could argue, the rabbit stood up on its hind legs, its nose twitching as it turned its attention toward the forest. It hopped a few steps forward, pausing to glance back at them, its intent clear. "It wants us to follow it again," Emma said, rising to her feet. "Absolutely not," Sarah said firmly. "We've already pushed our luck too far. We're heading back to the car, if we can even find it." "Sarah," Jack interjected, "there's no going back the way we came. The cave collapsed, remember?" Sarah froze, the weight of his words sinking in. She had been so focused on escaping the immediate danger that she hadn't considered the implications. They were lost in the forest, miles from any known trail, and their only guide was an animal. The rabbit hopped again, this time farther into the trees. Emma grabbed her mother's hand. "Mom, we have to trust it," she pleaded. Sarah looked down at her daughter, then at Jack, who nodded solemnly. With a heavy sigh, she relented. "Fine. But if anything else collapses, or if something attacks us, this is on you, Jack." Together, they followed the rabbit deeper into the woods. The faint moonlight filtering through the canopy gave the forest an ethereal glow. The silence was punctuated only by the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional distant call of a nocturnal bird. As they walked, the forest seemed to change. The air grew warmer, and the ground softened, covered in a thick carpet of moss. Strange plants, their leaves glowing faintly, appeared along the path. Emma reached out to touch one, but Sarah pulled her hand back. "Don't," she warned. "We don't know what's safe." Jack paused, his flashlight beam revealing claw marks on a nearby tree trunk. They were deep and fresh, the bark shredded as if by something powerful. "What do you think did that?" he asked, his voice tense. "Something we don't want to meet," Sarah replied, her eyes scanning the darkness. The rabbit paused again, its ears twitching. Then, without warning, it bounded ahead, disappearing into a dense thicket. "Wait!" Emma called, starting to run after it. "Emma, stop!" Sarah shouted, chasing after her. Jack followed, the box clutched tightly in one hand. They pushed through the underbrush, branches snagging their clothes and scratching their skin. When they broke through to the other side, they found themselves standing at the edge of a small clearing. At the center of the clearing was a pool of water, its surface glowing with an otherworldly blue light. The rabbit sat at the edge, its reflection shimmering in the luminous water. "What is this place?" Sarah whispered, her voice filled with awe. Jack stepped forward, his flashlight beam cutting across the pool. The water was impossibly clear, revealing smooth stones at the bottom and faint ripples of light that seemed to dance in patterns. Emma knelt beside the rabbit, her small hand resting on its back. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Jack approached the water's edge, the box in his hands. "This has to be connected," he said. Before he could open the box, the rabbit stood abruptly, its ears flattening against its head. It turned toward the forest, its body tense, as if sensing something unseen. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, her voice edged with panic. The rabbit let out a soft, high-pitched sound, a warning. A moment later, the distant sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the trees, growing louder with each passing second. "Something's coming," Jack said, his grip tightening on the box. The rabbit hopped toward them, nudging Emma as if urging her to move. We have to go, Sarah said, pulling Emma to her feet. But the footsteps were closing in, and whatever was approaching sounded big. The family huddled together, the rabbit at their feet, as the forest seemed to hold its breath. The glow of the pool cast their shadows onto the trees as they waited, their hearts pounding, for whatever was coming next. The footsteps grew louder, resonating through the dense forest like distant thunder. Sarah's breath hitched as her eyes darted toward the source of the sound. Jack held the ornate box tightly, his knuckles white with tension. Emma clutched Sarah's hand, trembling, while the rabbit stood alert at their feet, its ears twitching. "What is that?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her own heart. "I don't know," Jack replied, stepping protectively in front of his family. His flashlight beam cut through the dark, but it illuminated only trees, their gnarled branches, casting eerie shadows. Then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. At first, it was indistinct, a massive silhouette blending with the shadows. As it stepped into the glowing light of the pool, they saw it clearly, a creature unlike anything they had ever imagined. It stood on 4 muscular legs, its fur a mottled blend of earth tones that seemed to shift and ripple. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the eerie light from the pool. Long, curved claws glinted as it moved, and its presence exuded both power and an almost otherworldly intelligence. Emma gasped, clinging to Sarah. "Mom, what is that?" "I don't know," Sarah replied, her voice shaking. She pulled Emma closer, her mind racing with possible escape routes. The creature tilted its head, its glowing eyes locking onto Jack. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, to their astonishment, the rabbit hopped forward, placing itself between the family and the creature. "What is it doing?" Sarah hissed, her panic rising. The rabbit stood still, its small form dwarfed by the massive creature. It let out a low, almost guttural sound, a noise that seemed impossibly loud for such a small animal. The creature paused, its ears twitching, and let out a rumbling growl that vibrated through the air. Then it stepped back. It's listening to the rabbit," Jack said in disbelief. The creature's glowing eyes scanned the family, lingering on the box in Jack's hands. It made a guttural noise that sounded almost like a warning, then turned and disappeared into the forest, its massive frame melting into the shadows. The silence that followed was deafening. "What just happened?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "I think the rabbit protected us," Jack said, his gaze shifting to the small animal. Emma knelt beside the rabbit, stroking its fur. "Thank you," she whispered. But the rabbit wasn't done. It turned and hopped toward the glowing pool, pausing at its edge to look back at them. Jack stepped closer, his curiosity overpowering his fear. "It wants us to do something," he said, looking down at the box in his hands. "You can't be serious," Sarah said, her voice sharp. "That thing, whatever it was, might come back. We need to get out of here." "We can't leave without knowing what this is all about," Jack replied firmly. He knelt by the pool, the box resting on his knees. The carvings on its surface shimmered faintly in the light, and as he studied them, he noticed a small indentation, a keyhole. "There's no key," he muttered. The rabbit hopped closer, nudging the box with its nose. Its movements were deliberate, almost as if it knew something they didn't. "What are you waiting for?" Sarah asked, her tone a mix of anger and desperation. Jack hesitated, then dipped his hand into the pool. The water was surprisingly warm, and as his fingers brushed the smooth stones at the bottom, he felt something cold and metallic. He pulled it out, a small, ornate key that matched the intricate patterns on the box. "You've got to be kidding me," Sarah said, her eyes widening. Jack fit the key into the lock and turned it. The box clicked open, and a soft, golden light spilled out, illuminating their faces. Inside was a small crystal, no larger than an egg, its surface swirling with colors that seemed to shift and dance. "What is that?" Emma asked, her voice filled with wonder. "I don't know," Jack admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Before they could react, the ground trembled again, this time more violently. The water in the pool began to ripple, and a low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. "We need to go," Sarah shouted, grabbing Emma's hand. But the rabbit stayed put, its gaze fixed on the crystal. It made a soft, insistent noise, as if urging them to act. Jack looked at the rabbit, then back at the crystal. I think it's telling us to put it in the water." "Are you insane?" Sarah yelled. "We don't even know what that thing is." "We don't have time to argue," Jack shot back. Without another word, he placed the crystal into the pool. The moment it touched the water, the glowing light intensified, and the hum became a resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through their very bones. The forest around them transformed. The plants glowed brighter, the air became warmer, and the ground beneath them stopped shaking. The pool itself began to radiate a soft, golden light that spread outward, illuminating the forest in a serene, almost magical glow. The rabbit stepped forward, dipping its paws into the water. It turned to look at them one last time before disappearing into the pool, its small form swallowed by the golden light. "No!" Emma cried, reaching for it, but Sarah held her back. As the light faded, the pool returned to its normal state, its surface calm and still. The forest was silent once more. What just happened?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "I think we just witnessed something we were never meant to see," Jack replied, his eyes still fixed on the pool. Emma wiped her tears, staring at the spot where the rabbit had vanished. "It saved us," she said softly. "And now it's gone." The family stood in stunned silence, the weight of what had happened sinking in. The box lay empty in Jack's hands, its purpose fulfilled. But they all knew this was only the beginning of the mystery. The golden glow that had illuminated the forest was gone, leaving the family in eerie silence. The only sound was the faint rustling of leaves as a gentle breeze swept through the trees. Emma knelt at the pool's edge, staring into its now still waters. "Where did it go?" she whispered, her voice tinged with sorrow. Jack stood beside her, his hands still trembling from the events that had unfolded. "I don't know," he admitted, his gaze fixed on the ornate box in his hands. Empty now, it seemed ordinary, its intricate carvings no longer glowing. Sarah paced a few feet away, her arms crossed tightly. "We need to leave," she said firmly, breaking the heavy silence. "Whatever this is, whatever just happened, we can't stay here any longer." Before Jack could respond, a deep, resonant sound echoed through the forest. It wasn't the growl of an animal or the rumble of shifting earth, but something far more profound, like the hum of an ancient bell tolling in the distance. The family froze. The sound grew louder, vibrating through the air and the ground beneath their feet. The pool's surface began to ripple again, and a faint light emerged, slowly growing brighter. "No," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "I thought it was over." Jack stepped forward, shielding Emma instinctively. "Stay back," he warned. The light from the pool intensified, but this time it wasn't golden. It was silver, sharp and radiant, casting long shadows across the clearing. The hum deepened, resonating in their chests, and the ground beneath them began to tremble. Then, from the center of the pool, something began to emerge. At first, it was indistinct, a formless glow rising from the water. But as it solidified, it became clear, a figure, tall and ethereal, cloaked in shimmering light. The family stared, their fear mingling with awe. The figure was humanoid in shape, but its features were otherworldly. Its translucent form seemed to be made of liquid light, and its eyes glowed with an intensity that felt both intimidating and compassionate. What is it?" Sarah stammered, her voice barely a whisper. The figure raised an arm, its movements slow and deliberate. Though it made no sound, they all felt a voice inside their minds, a deep, resonant tone that spoke not in words, but in emotions and impressions. "You have unlocked the key to the cycle." Jack staggered back, clutching the box. "What do you mean?" he asked aloud, his voice trembling. The figure turned its glowing gaze toward him. The crystal was not a gift. It was a choice. You have set in motion what was long forgotten. Sarah stepped forward, her fear momentarily overcome by desperation. "We didn't mean to do anything," she said, her voice cracking. "We were just trying to survive." The figure's form flickered, its light pulsing. "Survival is the catalyst. The bond between your kind and theirs has long been severed. The cycle must begin anew." Emma, who had been silent, suddenly spoke. "The rabbit," she said, her voice small but steady. "It brought us here. It showed us the way." The figure turned its attention to Emma, and for a moment, the light softened. The guide fulfilled its purpose. The choice was yours to make. "What choice?" Jack demanded. "We didn't know what we were doing." The figure's light brightened, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to hum with energy. "The choice to restore what was lost. The connection between your world and theirs. But with it comes responsibility." The family exchanged uneasy glances. "What kind of responsibility?" Sarah asked cautiously. "To protect. To nurture. To guide others as you were guided. The balance must be maintained, or the cycle will break once more." Before they could respond, the figure began to dissolve, its form breaking apart into streams of silver light that swirled around the pool. The water glowed brighter, then dimmed, until it was still once more. The hum faded, and the forest was silent again. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Emma broke the silence, her voice trembling. "It's gone, like the rabbit." Jack exhaled slowly, his mind racing. I think it was trying to tell us that this place, this connection, it's our responsibility now." Sarah shook her head, her fear replaced by anger. "Responsibility for what? A glowing pool? A forest full of monsters? We don't even know what any of this means." Jack looked down at the empty box in his hands, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe it means we're part of something bigger than we realize," he said. "Something ancient. And maybe it's not just about us." Emma knelt by the pool again, her small hand skimming its surface. "The rabbit trusted us," she said softly. "We have to do the same." Sarah looked at her daughter, then at Jack. "And what happens when we fail?" Jack met her gaze, his expression resolute. "We won't." As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, the family turned away from the pool, their path uncertain, but their bond stronger than ever. And deep within the forest, hidden from the world, the silver light of the pool began to glow once more, a silent promise that the cycle had indeed begun anew. The family trudged back through the forest, the dawn casting long shadows across the mossy ground. The air felt lighter now, almost as if the forest itself had exhaled after holding its breath for centuries. Birds began to chirp, their songs timid at first but growing louder as the sunlight stretched further into the clearing. Emma clung to Sarah's hand, her eyes darting back toward the hidden pool. She hadn't spoken much since the light vanished, and the look on her face was a mix of wonder and sadness. "Do you think the rabbit will come back?" she asked softly. Sarah glanced at Jack before replying, her voice gentle. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe it's gone to a better place." Jack, walking ahead, stopped and turned toward them. "I don't think it's gone, not really," he said, his tone reflective. "That pool, the light, it felt alive, didn't it? Like it's part of something bigger." Sarah frowned, her skepticism still lingering. "Bigger or not, we were just a normal family before this. Now we're supposed to be, what? Guardians of some magical forest?" Jack placed a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe we were chosen for a reason. Or maybe we just stumbled into something ancient and beautiful that needed us." He paused, searching for the right words. "Either way, I don't think it's something we can ignore." Emma tugged on Sarah's sleeve. "I don't think the rabbit is gone. I think it's watching us, like the big glowing person said." "The figure wasn't a person, Sarah said with a weak smile. "I don't know what it was." "Maybe it was a guardian," Emma said, her voice growing steadier. "And maybe now it wants us to be guardians too." Sarah's mouth opened as if to argue, but she stopped. She looked at her daughter, who seemed so small yet spoke with a certainty that was hard to refute. The words lingered in the air, and for the first time, Sarah felt a glimmer of something she hadn't expected: hope. Jack opened the trunk to stow the empty box, its weight now symbolic of the knowledge and responsibility they carried. Emma hesitated, glancing back toward the dense trees. "Do you think anyone will believe us?" Jack knelt beside her, his expression serious but kind. "Probably not," he admitted. "But maybe it's not about making people believe. Maybe it's about what we believe, and what we do with it." Emma nodded, her gaze lingering on the forest. "I think it's important. The pool, the rabbit, all of it." "It is," Jack said. "And one day, when the time is right, maybe we'll understand it better." The drive home was quiet, each family member lost in their thoughts. The world outside the car seemed brighter, more vivid, as if the events of the night had sharpened their senses. When they pulled into their driveway, the familiar sight of their house brought a strange comfort. It felt both unchanged and profoundly different, as though the family had crossed an invisible threshold into a new chapter of their lives. Sarah sat at the kitchen table that afternoon, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. The events of the night played over and over in her mind. The creature, the glowing figure, the rabbit's unwavering guidance, it all seemed impossible, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that they were now part of something extraordinary. Jack joined her, setting the ornate box on the table. He traced his fingers over its carvings, his expression thoughtful. "We don't have all the answers," he said quietly. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe it's enough to know we were part of something important." Sarah looked at him, her fear replaced by a cautious acceptance. "Do you really think we were chosen?" Jack shrugged. "I don't know. But I do know that Rabbit trusted us. And I don't think we can let it down." In the days that followed, life seemed to return to normal, or as normal as it could after what they'd experienced. Jack went back to work, Sarah resumed her daily routine, and Emma returned to school. But the forest and its secrets were never far from their minds. Emma often spent her evenings drawing pictures of the rabbit and the glowing pool. She filled pages with scenes of the mysterious creature and the figure that had emerged from the water. Each drawing seemed to capture a sense of wonder and purpose that had taken root in her young heart. One evening, as Emma sat on the porch with her sketchbook, a soft rustle in the bushes caught her attention. She looked up, her heart racing. For a moment, she thought she saw a flash of white, a familiar shape hopping into the shadows. A smile spread across her face as she whispered, "I knew you'd come back." Far away, deep within the forest, the pool glowed faintly once more. The water's surface rippled as if stirred by an unseen hand. The light reached out, touching the surrounding trees, breathing life into the ancient roots. And somewhere, in the depths of the forest, the cycle continued, silent, eternal, and filled with promise.